Good evening. Thank you for coming out tonight. For those of you whom I don't know or don't know me, my name is Mo Alethi, and I am the Executive Director of the Institute of Politics and Public Service at the McCourt School, better known on campus as GU Politics. And I want to welcome you all to the inaugural event of our new ongoing series entitled Know Your Power. The idea for this series was actually born in conversations with one of our new GU Politics fellows, Ashley Etienne, who is going to be spending this semester, Ashley, a long time, big deal in politics, is spending this semester in her discussion groups talking about power. And as we had conversations around the office, it occurred to us that, while we all want you to come to her discussion groups, that this was a bigger conversation, and it's an ongoing conversation. What is it? What is power? What does it mean to you? How do you exercise it? And we thought this was a good time to launch this series during Black History Month and into Women's History Month in March, because for much of our history, power was concentrated in the hands of very few. And there were a lot of people out there who were parts of communities that didn't really feel like they could exercise power. They couldn't even get a seat at the table to be a part of the conversation, let alone lead the conversation. And so, beginning with tonight and in the coming months and beyond, we're going to introduce you to people who are barrier breakers, people who didn't just find their voice, they found their power, and are leading those conversations. People in government, people in politics, people in advocacy, people who run major television networks. And so we're excited. We hope that you will be a part of this conversation tonight and beyond, and that we can have a real conversation about what it means moving forward. So, with that, I will sit down and allow me to introduce Christiana Dole, a sophomore in the School of Foreign Service, one of the student associates at GU Politics, who is going to introduce tonight's speaker and moderator. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining today's virtual forum event hosted by the Georgetown Institute of Politics and Public Service at the McCourt School of Public Policy, known to many of you as GU Politics. My name is Christiana Dole, and I am a sophomore in the School of Foreign Service and the McDonough School of Business, majoring in Business and Global Affairs. I am currently serving as a GU Politics Student Associate for Communications. From the beginning of my time at Georgetown, GU Politics has offered me unique opportunities to bridge my interest in journalism and politics in a way that has strengthened my communication skills and illustrated the numerous paths to careers in politics and media. From opportunities to engage with senators and journalists in discussion groups to seeing live network commentary, I've gained a strong sense of how my voice can fit into the larger dialogue surrounding current political challenges and avenues for change. Since my time in high school, participating in a student broadcasting group, I've viewed broadcast journalism and media as an avenue through which to experience and foster community. The ability to strengthen your own voice and, in turn, elevate the voices of others, highlighting unique perspectives, continues to resonate with me. As someone who believes in the power of each of us developing our own voices and leveraging them to make a difference, our guests tonight exemplify the impact of using your voice and breaking barriers. I am pleased to introduce our guest today, President of MSNBC, Rashida Jones, the first Black executive to lead a major news network. With a career spanning local and national news media programming and operations, Ms. Jones has spearheaded the cross-platform coverage of major events and breaking news, and currently holds oversight of all editorial units, business development, and technical operations at MSNBC. We are thrilled to have her join us today to share her perspectives on the unique experiences and challenges she has faced in today's society and workplace, and how she defines her power. Today's discussion will be moderated by veteran communications strategist Ashley Etienne, Spring 2022 GU Politics Fellow. She has been a senior advisor to two of the most powerful women in the world, having served as the former communications director to Vice President Kamala Harris, as well as communications director and senior advisor to Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. Please join the conversation on social media by tagging GU Politics using @GUPolitics and the hashtag GUPoliticsForum.
Be some walk-on music that didn't happen.
I could sing.
There it is. Thank you. We gotta lighten it up. I feel like a millennial with my phone here, but I'm an Xer. Welcome, guys. Thank you, Rashida, for joining us. This is an honor to have you be our first inaugural speaker at this wonderful series about knowing your power. To Mo's point, I've been grappling with this concept for a long time. Like, what is my power? And then once I know what it is, like, what do I do with it? Right. So I want to use this time with you to really explore more about you, less about sort of what you do day-to-day business, but who you are as a leader, what power means to you, what sort of lessons and actionable tips can you give this next generation of Rashidas and Ashley who want to not only achieve what we've been able to do, but also to exceed that? And I think, power is always at play, and sort of having a sense of that and knowing how to leverage it could really catapult one's success. I'd love to just start there with that concept. Great. Tell me how you define your own power. What is Rashida's power? What is your superpower?
Yeah, so personally, I think I've become really skilled at kind of calm under pressure, multitasking. I have 10 things going on at once in my head and 20 in real life, and somehow they all get done. And so, I think one of the things that I bring to the table as it relates to just the power and skill that I have is the ability to do a lot of things, lead in a way that feels organized and not chaotic, but also innovative and effective. And when you talk about power, because every time I heard it when you were introducing us and when you were setting us up, like, it had an extra oomph to it. Mm-hmm. And I think that, as you described here, it's not only kind of what your power is, but how you use it. Yeah. One of the things that's really important to me as I think about power and what does that mean for me and what my powers are, it's also how do you transfer it to other people? Mm-hmm. How do you position yourself to be able to uplift and help other people? So when I think about my powers, the thing that I think is most important is being in a position where I can not only bring other people into the fold, but influence them to use their power.
That's fantastic. And I've read that you do a lot of mentoring, and it's very important to you, but we'll get to that a little later in the discussion. I read where you said once that you've been constantly underestimated. And for that reason, you've always had to prove people wrong. But you've done it through your actions and not your words. Now, that part, the action and not your words, is something I respect greatly. Like, both of us have done exceptional things, but keep a very low profile. It feels like we keep our head down and do the work, right? And the work speaks for itself. But as a young person, I think I felt that way at one point in my career, that I wasn't fully appreciated and was underestimated. I often tell the students here that I consider myself to be like Kanye West 1.0 before he got the Grammys, and he's going around town like he's not appreciated.
Kanye,
No, free. Where he's like, I'm brilliant, no one's recognizing my brilliance. And so, I remember as a young person, like, in my early 30s, feeling super frustrated by this concept and this idea of the expectations of women, and especially women of color, are higher, right? And so it feels, it always felt daunting for me to sort of prove people wrong, right? And like, why do I have to prove you wrong? Right. Why not just pull up a seat, right? But as I become a seasoned professional, and I love your thoughts on this, I've sort of felt like it is liberating to some degree. Like, it creates an opportunity for me to blow your mind. Because
low expectations, high delivery.
Right. Yeah. So tell me how you, over the course of your career, because I feel like you've said this has been this feeling of being underestimated has been around for a long time. How you process that? How do you translate that into your own power and strengthening your own power?
So I would kind of describe it in two different ways. One, there was how other people viewed my power, and then the other was how I viewed it myself. And so I'll start externally. And when I started working in television, I was young. I was in college still. I started my junior year of college. And so as you guys are going through midterms and trying to figure it all out, I was doing that and working overnights at a TV station, which was just crazy. It's crazy now in my 41-year-old brain. At 19, 20 was great.
And you're like hungry for it.
I was hungry for it. But so I was always, because I started young, I was always younger than my colleagues at every point in my career. And so there was always well, she just got here. She doesn't know what she's doing. I very clearly remember an anchor telling me, you are the best writer we have. You are the best storyteller. You're just too young. And it always made me insecure because I felt like I wasn't getting credit for what I was doing. I was getting credit for who they thought I was. And those two things weren't necessarily, I had a skill set that was more elevated than most entry-level employees because I'd started working earlier. And so because of that, I always felt like I've got to try harder to make sure they see what I'm doing, because I can talk about it until I'm blue in the face. But I found, especially when you're the young person in a newsroom, you don't have the power per se because you don't have the title, you don't have the tenure. But what I needed to do was to get people to want to listen to me. I needed to get people to want to follow me. When I had to call that reporter to say, I need you to drive an hour across the bridge to go cover this big bad thing that happened and you don't want to do that, I didn't have the power as his boss, but I needed to have the influence to make those things happen. So I think my tactic was always head down, pencils up, do the job, because they can't deny that. They can challenge what you say about yourself. They can challenge how you position yourself, but the results don't lie. And so my focus was always do the work, because they can't debate the performance. They can't debate what your output is, and that'll kind of shut them up. But the other part of that, and I think on some level I still feel this and do this, I never went into any of these roles feeling like I am the best person to ever do this job. And so I always had there was a layer of humility in there where I felt like, and I still feel like, I need to perform at 100% to prove to myself. It's not about proving to some colleague or somebody else, but I always felt like the only reason that I'm here is because my abilities got me here, my performance got me here, but in order to stay here, I have to continue to perform. And so I internalize a lot of that in a healthy way, in the sense of I want to do well for myself, I want to perform well for myself. And so when you have kind of this innate desire to prove yourself right to yourself, plus kind of the knowledge of the best way to influence people is by doing the work, like that's kind of what I've lived in.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, you mentioned like, how do you bring people along? Tell me a little bit about tactically how you do that as a young person, not as experienced, being underestimated. How do you convince your, colleagues that like, listen, we're going left is the way we need to go? Yeah,
so I probably the same tactics I use now. It's building relationships. It's building a record of trust. It's getting the right people who have seen your work to help others understand, where you are and what you're able to do. I think those are skill sets that I lean into now, and those are skill sets I leaned into in the beginning. It wasn't about, schmoozing with this person and kind of, working them to agree with you or to come into your space. It was about proving it to them. And so I think those are kind of core skill sets that are important early in your career, important later in your career, because at the end of the day, you want people who want to go to war with you. Sure. I have a megaphone now that if I ask people to go to war with me, they will go to war. Sure. But I want them to go to war with me. I want them to be a part of the strategy. I want them to be a part of our success and our shared success. And I think it's the slow and steady, you constantly build on that relationship. You constantly have these little successes that build upon the bigger successes. And then people become more willing to follow your lead.
Totally. So do they call you the general or no?
They don't. I am very disciplined about some things. I am a stickler for meetings. Meetings start on time. They end on time.
Right? You're very disciplined, very focused.
But it's always in a very family-oriented, collegial, people-first way. And so I think that combination too. But no one calls me the general yet. Maybe my kids, but I don't know. Yeah.
So it's so funny that you say that, because I remember walking through life like, oh my God, no one's appreciating me, no one's seeing me. And then to find out later, Pelosi called, Obama called, and the VP called saying, we've been watching you all this time. So the advice I also give is put your head down and do the work, because the work.
You don't know who's watching.
Yes,
Yeah.
and everybody typically is. I mean, I always, and tell me what you think about this, I always chase the challenge.
Yeah,
Like, I
yeah.
always like to put myself in the center of the action,
Yep.
because all eyes are on you. If
Yeah.
you fail, you fell up typically. But if you succeed, everybody knows, right? So tell me what you think about, tell me a time that you put yourself as a young professional, like in the center of the action, and like what resulted from that.
I mean, I was always inclined to raise my hand for whatever the next new big project is. And I always felt like I had a friend a long time ago say to me, like, as long as you feel comfortable betting on yourself, you can do anything. And so again, some of it was developing some of the core skill sets to be able to deliver. But I raised my hand for everything. I remember very early, I'm going early in my career when I was working in local news, and it was, we were kind of structuring the business, and they needed someone to run the weather department. I knew nothing about weather. I was in Virginia. Like, the weather's beautiful until it's not. You know what I mean? Like, it was just.
And I feel like everybody watches the Weather Channel. It's currently
Well,
got some amazing
but this
ratings,
experience
right?
got me to the Weather Channel. So I am, just out of college, early 20s. I'm producing. At the time, I think I was producing the 11 p.m. news, and they needed someone to run the weather unit. And so, fine, raise my hand. There's a new task that no one seems to want to do. I want to do it. So I ran the unit. That season, a few months later, we get a huge hurricane that hit the area. A few months later, I got a job offer from the Weather Channel because I had this unique experience running a weather unit that, and local, like, most people don't get to do things like that and produce a show, but it led me to one of my first big jobs, that led me to one of my first big management jobs, that led me to a news director job, that led me to NBC. And so it was that idea of raise your hand when there's something, even if it doesn't make sense, even if it doesn't feel like it leads to a specific place or thing, just always being hungry for opportunity, always being hungry for learning. I think especially in places that take you just outside of your comfort zone or your area of expertise, because you never know where it could lead.
Totally.
In no way did I think I was going to go to the Weather Channel, but now I had this new experience that then led me there.
So this is a nice transition, because I'd love to talk about your rise. And you talked a little bit about starting at the local stations, the Weather Channel, but I want to back you up a second and talk a little bit about this newsletter you you wrote in the 3rd grade.
I love writing. I loved it.
What made you think of the 3rd grade, this is what I want to do? I want to do a newsletter. I want to interview people. Like,
So what I knew newspapers because as a 3rd grade, what is that, 10 years old, maybe 9 years old, I can't remember at this point. But like, I knew newspapers, and I knew when I walked to school, we passed the newspaper box, and there was one. And then when I walked home, there was the evening version. And so that's what I knew. I like talking to people. I like the idea, like, people who know me can't imagine. I like this idea of like bossing people around a little bit and leading people. But so there was this opportunity to gather my friends, and I very clearly remember it was me, my sister, my neighbor Nicole, my neighbor Dorian. We used to go door to door and interview people, and then I would put the stories together, and it would be this whole thing. And I remember cutting it out because, again, we had a typewriter, and you cut out the thing. And it was the first taste I got into telling stories, but telling stories about people. Like there's one lane you go in where you can make up fairy tales and farcical things. There's another thing where you can go learn something new about someone. And it was just so interesting to me. And so that bug bit then, I found ways to kind of nurture it. And through high school, I was the editor of the school paper and all of these things, and didn't realize until I got to college, when I got to Hampton, that you could actually write for television.
Yeah.
Didn't know that was a job. Like, that was life-changing for me. And the moment I realized that you could bring the art of storytelling, the art of bringing people's stories to lives in an immediate space, that was just my life calling.
That's incredible. It sort of reminds me of the Malcolm Gladwell, like if you put in 10,000 hours, when the opportunity arrives, you're prepared and you're ready.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your time at MSNBC. It was a quick, sort of steady ascent. In April 2020, you, as was mentioned, led oversight of the MSNBC's daytime news coverage, and then within 3 months, was then promoted to doing weekend programming. But by the fall, you executive produced a pair of primary debates for the Democratic presidential, which were record-setting. Yeah. Tell me what you've learned over the course of your journey about yourself. not just as an employee, a storyteller, but then a leader?
Yeah, one of my takeaways from that period, because it was such a hectic period, because the other undercurrent of that the history books won't even have an appreciation for, is that it was all during COVID, right? Like all of these things were happening during COVID. I was not an expert in doing any of these things until I did them, and so I knew I didn't have necessarily the experience of producing a debate or that kind of town hall, or the experience of a presidential debate, or the experience of running these day parts in that way. And so one thing that I've always really focused on is experience is a factor, but not the only factor, and no one's going to outwork me. I'm always going to put in the extra effort. I am always going to lean on the experiences of others and lessons learned, and find ways to create efficiencies, to create innovation, to bring creativity to it. And so, what I really tried to do during that period, and I think it's one of the things when I kind of got through that cycle, and then we had election week in there, and by that Saturday afternoon, I finally get home and I breathe, a sigh of relief. It was like, wow, I just did that. Like, I didn't know I could do it, but I knew I could work hard. And so it was also kind of the humility of the moment of, I'm not going into this knowing everything, but I'm going into it working my butt off. And by the time I got to the end of that cycle, of literally that election cycle, like there was nothing more fulfilling in the world. Walking in the door after a week of covering, waiting to call the race, and like for the first time in a week, like seeing the kids, and I remember my daughter FaceTiming me, "Mom, did you know that Joe Biden won?" I'm like, "Baby, turn to channel 4. I'm producing the special report that's announcing that you learned it because." But
My dad does the same thing. He's like, "Oh, I saw on MSNBC where the president gave a speech today." I'm like, I was there, right?
Right, I was there. But it was also just that kind of exhale of the thing that you didn't think that you could do, the thing that in the middle of the night that kept you up because you thought about this nugget and what if I do that? Like, you were able to do it. And I think like the concentration of that year in particular and getting to the finish line in a very successful way, for me, my takeaway was anything can be done. Anyone can do it as long as you put the work in.
Yeah, totally. Let's transition a little bit to this anybody can do it.
Yeah.
Because, it's part of my conversations or discussions about power. We're going to spend some time talking about the intersection of race and gender.
Yep.
And how that impacts and the implications on your ability to not only know your power, gain power, but then to exercise your power.
Right.
I've been, as you are, the sort of a first,
Right.
and the only one at the table. And you and I met, and we, the conversation that we had was, I was saying, there's never been a national conversation about the intersection, about women of color leaders and the intersection of race and gender. Like, I read Lean In, it was fantastic. No read on Read In, but like Lean In. But there was a part of it where I was like, this is not exactly my situation, my set of circumstances.
Right.
Before we sort of dig a little into that issue, I want to get your reactions to being the first.
Yeah, I mean,
what does that mean to you to be the first?
I feel like by the time I got to this point in this opportunity, I really truly felt like I earned it. And so I never felt like, and I think like my bosses never treated me like, well, we need to check another box here. You're here, you're it, let's move in. I really feel like my hard work was seen and rewarded. I know the blood, sweat, and not really tears, because I am the general in some ways. I don't cry.
We don't cry.
No, we don't cry.
There's no crying in
But
news.
I knew my effort got me to that point, so I always felt confident about how I got there or why I got there. But I also knew and understood the responsibility of being there. I knew that the eyes were going to be on me. I knew people were going to be curious about it. I knew in some ways people were going to think, oh, well, this was a token move and in the year of reckoning and all these other things. But I never let any of that stuff get to me, because I know I wouldn't be here if I couldn't be here, right? Like, I earned the chair that I was in. I earned the seat that I was in. But it was always important to me, and I very much remember this on that day where we had the conversation about me taking this job, and I thought about, how do I use this platform for all of the other young women journalists who didn't know it was possible, the students who are thinking about where do I go and haven't seen somebody who looked like them do it. I didn't see anyone who looked like me in a
Same.
job like
Yeah.
this, but it didn't mean that I thought I couldn't do it, right? And so it was the balance of how do I go into this and take the opportunity, take the bull by the horns. This is a new level of power that and you kind of think and I thought about this, as I hit my 1 year anniversary, like, was the last year what I thought it would be? No. The power of it, because the power comes with responsibility, it comes with influence, you just become this public person that you weren't before. I'm the same mom that sits in the stands at the game last season as this season, but the last season vibe is different from the current season vibe because now they see me in papers and stuff like that. And so, but I knew like our life was changing. The amount of power and responsibility was something not to take lightly, but I had to be purposeful in what I did with that power.
Let's talk about that though. How are you purposeful about that and what are you doing with that power?
Yeah, so it's very important to me to use the platform and opportunity to help other people along the way at all different levels. I mean, I talk, it's lovely being here with students today. I talk to early professional students, mid-career folks, other women executives on a regular basis, and trying to find ways, whether it's the idea of growth in your career, whether it's specific tactical approaches, paying it forward for me. There's nothing more important than paying it forward. I think leading by example and being a good example has been really important to me, and showing the value of hard work. It's also important to me to normalize my life experience. My life experience, just by the nature of what my life and background is not going to look like any other of the presidents, right? And I've said this before. It might involve a little bit of Jay-Z, it might involve a little bit of Beyonce, not necessarily together. It can be together. They have an album together.
Let them stay together.
I want them together, but separate music.
Yes.
It might involve a conversation about being a mom. It might involve a conversation about being a woman in her 40s. Like, there are all of these things that I think, as I think about my power, it's important to normalize what's authentically me, because I want to make sure the person that's coming behind me doesn't feel like they have to switch it up.
Sure.
Or, at work, I pretend I like this, but at home, I really like that. Like, I think part of the responsibility and the power that I have is to normalize all of these different life experiences. And that's something I've tried to bring to the table.
That's awesome. Really powerful stuff. So on this issue of sort of Black women leaders, so today more Black women obviously are commanding the power as a CEO. In the hall, more Black women are in the halls of Congress, leading entertainment, news, film entities such as yourself. But as I mentioned, there's this lack of a larger national conversation. And, when I started, I was aware of it, but it didn't really sink in until I started with the vice president's office.
Right.
And, everyone's asking, what do you think about the coverage? How do you think she's doing? And I'm like, all of these dynamics are at play, but nobody's talking about them. Like, no one's giving any light to them. And so I'd love to hear you talk about, for, those who are not Black women, like, what are the unique challenges facing Black women leaders today? I had the experience of running the impeachment war room, and I had a deputy who was not a young a Black woman, and it was a constant sort of questioning of my authority.
Yeah.
And then factions sort of develop where they're trying to undermine my authority. And I'm like, wait a second, like, I'm the boss in here. Like, how is all of this happening? And so for me, it feels like if pressure creates a diamond, then Black women should always constantly shine.
Yep.
And the beauty of us is when the light sort of hits us, we reflect back that brilliance to the world. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you've experienced, broadly about the challenges, because we've talked about this before, and I've talked to other of your hosts about the issue. We've seen it play out in a lot of different spaces and places across industries as it relates to Black women leaders. But I'd love to get your thoughts on that, how you handled it, and then in the end, I want to know how that really reinforced your power.
Sure. So I think, in general, women in general, Black women in particular, are held to different standards. And I think for me, going into the job, the role that I'm in, I know that I may or may not, and it's not necessarily from my organization, but I think just at large, people are going to look at what I do. First of all, I'm relatively, now I'm new to the job. I'm of a different generation than some of my predecessors. I'm in the short list of women in a job like this. And so I know for all of those different factors, people are going to be looking at what I do. They're going to be looking for the slip up. They're going to be looking for the misstatement. They're going to be looking for a decision they don't agree with. And so for me, I've just really tried to focus on, and this it actually goes back to something my dad said to me when I was young. Your job is to do the work and not worry about what other people have to say. Your job is like almost from a position of having blinders on. The end goal isn't about what they thought about what you did with the job. It's not about people's interpretation of the work that you're doing. You pour your effort into the work that you're doing and deliver the results. And again, it goes back to something I said earlier. Your work can't be denied. And so there is going to be that second guessing. There's going to be that underestimating, but that's their problem. That's not my problem.
Yeah.
Like that's something that, I wish you the best in figuring out how you're going to wrap your head around the fact that this Black woman is in this job, because I'm here, I'm cool, I'm comfortable with that. But I kind of shut myself off to it and really focus on the work, because it's the moment you let that get in your head, you start second guessing yourself.
Yeah.
And I don't have room for that. I don't have room for error and to let someone else's perception of who I am or what they think I'm all about or how skilled or whatever they think I am. Like, I've just got to do the job. The good thing is this job is so busy that there's no time to let other stuff in.
Sure, or second guess yourself.
No.
In it all. So the general is made of Teflon?
Like, I'm human too, right? I'm human, and it's like, but that's part of the thing. Like, I know I'm human, so if I don't let that stuff in, I don't have time to let it fester and get in my head and alter how I do my job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's get to your vision for MSNBC. My entire family is obsessed with MSNBC.
I love it.
My dad recently went blind, but he listens to MSNBC all day. And as
Wonderful.
I said, he's like, the vice president's giving a speech. I'm like, I work for her, right?
Standing right there.
Do you know what I do all day? My daughter sits down and watches Joy Henry with her grandma. They love Joy Henry. And then I'm partial to Tiffany, obviously, because I've been friends with her for 10 years. I really think you guys should rebrand MSNBC, like the network for all generations.
It's for everyone.
It's for everyone. But given all the transitions and the disruption we're seeing in the industry in general, in this sort of intensified battle for eyeballs, the streaming industry, you guys are, launching programs on Peacock, et cetera, et cetera. It, to me, seems like it would create this opportunity to diversify and sort of, to some degree, democratize content, right, on television. Would you agree with that? And tell us a little bit about what your vision is for MSNBC as the new head.
Yeah, so I'll take something you said and flip it a little bit. So you talked about, MSNBC should be the channel for everyone. My vision for the network is to be the brand for everyone. And so part of that is a channel, a big part of it is a channel, and it's a legacy that we've had for 25 years. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary in July. But the channel is a big piece of it, but not all of it. There's the streaming effort that we have and really getting into those audiences as people are migrating from linear cable into the streaming space. How do we bring the value of our brand, the connection with our brand, the fact that we can connect with the 6-year-olds to the grandmothers, and like how do we take that engagement to a place where they're already flocking to? How do we create a space in the audio universe to tell really interesting stories? How do we bring that into the digital space, whether it's social or on websites or whatever? So one of the things I'm really focused on is how do we broaden how we define and how the audience defines MSNBC, because we're a very successful channel, and I want to look for opportunities to bring those successes elsewhere.
So MSNBC has to be the most diverse cable network on air now. You guys are number one among African American viewers compared to your other competitors. I love absolutely all the content. Do you sort of see it as you guys are responding to consumer demand, or are you driving it?
So I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think what my vision was, and a lot of that diversity has come in some of the new shows we've launched even in the last year and a half, is to better reflect the country that's watching. For me, the audience makeup should reflect the folks that they're seeing on the screen. Sure. And so, that some of that is you've seen in the success of African American viewers. We just announced today that Katie Fang is launching a new show, and she talked to me very personally about what this meant for her Asian daughter to see her mom on the big screen in that way. Totally. So we're really trying to, beyond just like Black viewers and Asian viewers and Hispanic viewers and viewers of all backgrounds, really trying to create content and programming that's representative of the country. So it's not necessarily just because, it's supply and demand. People are interested in what they're interested in, and we're bringing diverse, interesting content, and they're flocking to us. So it's a matter of our supply meeting their demand, but I think that goes hand in hand, and it's something that's been really important.
Okay, we're getting short on time, and I definitely want to get to the harder questions, which will come from the students.
Wonderful.
Because they're all brilliant Georgetown students.
I love it.
But before we get to that, I want to quickly ask two questions. One, because this is something I know that students really care about. What would be your advice to Rashida at Hampton? And then what's the advice you give to Rashida every morning when you wake up?
Yeah.
Because it feels to me those two things are very
I'll
different.
start with the last one.
Yeah.
This is funny, and I don't think I've ever said this out loud, but I literally wake up every day. You heard me say this. Girl, you got this.
Nice.
I say it to myself.
And it's simple. Like,
I do.
yeah, it covers everything.
And you know what it is? Like, I can't remember what the circumstances were, but my son, who turns 16 next week, I remember him saying it to me once. Girl, you got this. He's like the most supportive person ever.
Nice.
And I just repeat it to myself every day. And it's really kind of in the spirit of, you go in, you tackle the day. Don't take anything too seriously. You know what you're doing. Including yourself. You know what you're doing. You got this. So that is the message that I give myself every morning, courtesy of Jonathan Jones. The Rashida in college, I wish I would have dreamed bigger. I remember very clearly after I got out of college, my first career goal was one day when I'm old, maybe 40.
Because that is old.
That's old when you're in college.
Now it's like, girl, you look good.
I might be in college for all you know.
Exactly right. Still getting carded.
And it was like, I remember saying, I want to be an executive producer one day when I'm in my 40s. And then 7 years into my career, I hit that. And I remember in a very stunning way, I was like, well, what else do I do? Because I kind of did the highest that I could go as a journalist, especially somebody that looks like me. And then every opportunity that's come since then has been an added bonus. And so I would say dream bigger. I do think about this often. Like, I remember sitting in classes, falling in love with journalism and falling in love with the craft and learning about, I remember the point in my college career where it stopped feeling like I was going to school and it just felt fun. And because I was so passionate about it, and it was really, I would tell myself, don't ever lose that passion. And I tell that to people all the time. One of the questions I get often is, what do you look for? What are the soft skills that you look for in candidates? And look, you can learn how to write, you can do all of these things. There is nothing more important than having passion, because this is a hard industry.
Yeah.
This is hard work to do it, and you have to love it or it's not worth it. And so dream bigger and only do it if you love it.
Okay, really quickly, rapidly. Guys, you want to start coming to the mics? It's time to ask a question. But before we do that, I want to just do a quick rapid fire questions. And then I'm going to say a phrase or a word, and I'd love for you to give me one word sort of response to that. What is your walk-on entry song, your entrance song? You mentioned Jay-Z. Is it a Jay-Z song?
Give me 10 seconds.
Okay. I'll tell you mine. Mine was Outkast, So Fresh and So Clean.
That's good.
Yeah, I'm like, because I'm feeling myself every time
I like
hear
it. We're going to go back to Kanye. I'd probably say All of the Lights.
Oh, I love that song.
Because it builds
yeah.
Yep.
That's a great one. Beyonce or Rihanna?
Beyonce. I
Girl,
love Rihanna though, but
really?
Beyonce, yes.
I'm obsessed with this baby. It's like the highlight of my year. I cannot wait.
I just want to know how she's going to fashion up the whole thing. I mean, she's a fashion killer, so.
Exactly, and not just day one, but for the kid's rest of his life. I'm ready for this. Being inducted into the Hall of Fame, the Scripps Howard School.
Surreal. It was surreal. I was there on Hampton's campus when they broke ground for the Scripps Howard Hall of Fame, my senior year. And they gave us these blue and white t-shirts. And I remember thinking, these kids are lucky. This place looks nice. And then a few years ago, to be able to walk in there and see my face on the wall, and to be an example for those students, has meant more than anything.
Did you cry?
I think I did. I think so. And my whole family was there, and it was as I said, I remember my remarks, I said, this is probably the biggest number of children you've had in this building. So all my nieces and nephews came, they all live in Virginia, and it was a special moment.
Cool. Play.
Plague?
Yeah, play. How do you play?
Hard.
Okay.
Yes. Competitively.
Okay. What's involved in that?
how I play.
Yeah.
Just in
Trips, like
play. I thought
play.
you meant
No,
I thought
play.
you meant like
now how do you play?
We're big on movies. We like our weekend movies. I love watching my kids play basketball.
Nice.
That's a pastime. And I love a good vacation. I love vegging out. Like I also, as hard as I work, I know how to turn my brain off, and I know how to like focus myself for downtime. Even if it's just in a moment, I could sit here. If you told me this was your downtime, zone out 10 minutes. So,
I've never learned that skill. I'm now that I'm out of politics, I'm starting to learn it. Okay, single working mom.
Yeah.
Your reaction.
Well, I'm about
One
to get
word.
married, so that's about to change.
So like that's right.
So
we're scratching out single. We're scratching out single. How about this one?
Rewarding,
Howard
though.
is a real HU.
Incorrect. False. Not factual. I love our
said one
Howard
word.
connection. False.
All right. No, I'm just joking. Last one, AKAs versus Delta. You know I'm a Delta, so I want to
I
hear
do know
one.
this. I'm not part of
Okay.
either, and I have friends in both groups. Sisterhood.
Nice. I don't know. I read that you were an AK, but you're not. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
No.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. There's still room in Delta for you. We love smart, beautiful women that know their power. All right, let's get started. Let's start over here. I'm sorry to take all that time.
Oh, you just took my mic. Can you hear me?
Okay, well, let's start over here then.
All right.
This is the student body president. Still?
Hi. I love a
Currently?
good leader. I was student government president in high school.
Nice.
Good
different.
trajectory. This is not on. Okay, it's a good trajectory for me though. I'm also the first Black woman to be in this position for myself,
Okay,
so I identify with a lot of what you talked
great.
about. Kind of,
Bring a little flavor to the presidency.
just a little bit of pepper and salt. But no, I was gonna talk about, and this is kind of hard for me to describe, but I find it present in a lot of the people that I speak about, especially Black women in political and other like high authority spaces, is that there can be a lot of admiration, but without respect. And it can almost be dehumanizing, even though with the language with which people will regard you, like, oh, we're so proud of you, you're so amazing. But like when you're in those leadership spaces, I think you guys spoke to it, people don't treat you like you're the leader in that space. So I was going to ask, how do you kind of contend with that, the spectacle of the strong Black woman, and kind of moving past that to be more humanly regarded?
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting, and it's happened to all of us, I think, in some capacity. There's a calculus that I go through in my head, which is, am I proving that I'm in charge for the sake of proving it, or is their action or decision or behavior influencing the outcome of what I'm trying to get done? And I try to stay away from well, he shook his hand first before mine, and like things that don't matter, and really trying to focus on like exuding that power when it matters. I have another saying that becomes a go-to saying, which is sometimes you have to kill a hostage, which is sometimes you have to prove a point to show, let me make it really clear that this is something that I own, that I'm responsible on, that I have the authority here. But I try to be very judicious in that, because then it becomes about, well, you're just trying to like, the power becomes more important than the influence. And I really try to focus on those moments that matter. And sometimes it's frustrating, but again, I also try to think about it, that is their problem, not my problem. And as long as it's not affecting how others see me in this leadership role or how I do the job, if it's something that doesn't feel substantial or important, I just try to, there's no need for me to try to convince that person, let me just do the job.
Thank
It's
you.
hard.
It
It's
is
hard.
hard.
Congratulations, dear.
Yeah. And the good thing is you're making room and space for the next, which is amazing.
All right, hello. My name is Malik. I'm a sophomore here, and my dad's also a Hampton grad, so I do know where the
it.
real HU is, and it's not down the street either. So, so my question is kind of like a two-part, and it kind of has to do with what you were saying earlier about being an example for people. So I was wondering, like, who do you see as like an example in your life? Like, who do you look up to? And then as well as, what would you say to people who don't have somebody to look up to because there's never been somebody that looked like them in the positions that they want?
Yes, I'll answer the second one first. I don't think the person that you look up to has to look like you. It's always nice when there's someone who's had a similar life experience that you can look at as a role model or a model of where you want to go. But they don't always have to look like you, and I wouldn't let that discourage you. You know, as far as my own personal kind of role models, you know, one of my colleagues at NBC, Yvette Miley, is just the North Star of leadership, of poise under fire, managing people kindly and humanely. And so when I grow up, that's who I want to be. Yeah.
And I've also found that it doesn't have to be someone in your own industry.
That's another good one,
right?
yes.
Like, I feel like my pastor is the person who I look up to, you know. And he's taught me more about how to function in the political space than anyone else has, and he's never been in it.
That's true.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Brady Condon. I'm a freshman in the SFS, and once
You
again,
gotta tell us what the SFS is.
oh, School of Foreign Service.
All right.
And as you said earlier, the expectations of being a woman of color in a position of power are a lot higher. And so I assume on your journey you've had a lot of doubters, a lot of people who've called the legitimacy into question.
Yeah.
Once you reach that point, though, where you've proven yourself, how do you deal with those people who have doubted you in the past and who may have been kind of wishing to an extent that,
Sure.
that you would fail or expecting
Waiting
to fail?
for you to fail, standing by for your failure. Look, I'm big on kind of moving forward and not letting those things get to me. Again, that's more of a them problem than a me problem. I'm thinking about this one instance where I had a producer who was junior to me, didn't agree with the direction I was giving him, got so angry that he punched the desk, had to leave the control room because he broke his hand, because he was that angry because I was telling him to do something he didn't want to do. And then he had to come back once he had his hand put in a cast to apologize and say, you were absolutely right. I know the reason I didn't want to follow you is because I didn't think you could lead me, and now I'm a believer. And so like that didn't take me having to like full force exert my power onto him, but it goes back to something I said earlier, which is do the work, believe in the decisions that you're making, believe in how you lead, and they'll follow.
Do you find that you have to constantly reassert yourself? I feel like for women of color, it's not like you get to do it once, so you're establishing how to do the job.
I have to remind people
and
a
then
couple times.
Yeah, and then you like walk away.
Oh,
'cause,
you
like,
forgot that I'm the person making that call.
Right,
Okay,
yes.
let me tell you again. But again, when it becomes about the power struggle, that gets in the way of the work, right?
Yeah.
So I try to, in a very collegial way, not make it about the power struggle, because then they can hook onto, well, you just want power and you're an angry black woman. No. We're going to be very collegial about this. I'm just going to be clear on where I stand on it.
Sure.
Yeah, JK Phoenix here, first year McCourt student, first year policy student at the McCourt School here at Georgetown. And I will say that Hampton University is the real HU.
God bless you.
Somebody's trying to work at MSNBC around here. Like, who's trying to get a job in the newsroom?
No, I wanted to really underscore the point about, you creating space. But one of the questions that I wanted to ask, this is not going to be a long one. A great 20th century philosopher, W.E.B. Du Bois, talks about the double conscience theory, right? I want to know, how did you tap into that? 15 years ago, you weren't, in the lofty position that you're in now, that you well deserve. How did you tap into that as a younger professional, right? And then the second part to that, right? How did you not only tap into it, but inspire the people not above you, but like your peers, your classmates, right? Who look up to you, not only now, but then.
Right. So I talked a little bit about this idea of normalizing different life experiences, right? And I remember, also the moment where I felt like I had a work Rashida and I had a home Rashida. And work Rashida behaved a certain way and home Rashida behaved a different way. And I remember consciously saying, like, there's no reason to live these kind of double lives or two different ideologies. And I didn't know at the time, but I lean into this point now. Not only is it just healthy for you to kind of live in that shared or one life experience, but for me, it's also important to create the example for other people around me. Like, this is not an industry, this is not a newsroom, this is not a business where you have to act a certain way. My life experience is as valued as everyone else who's a part of this process, and kind of living these two kind of ideologies is just, it's not healthy for me, but it's also a disservice to folks who want to be comfortable with being themselves, and I've really tried to lean into that. Yeah.
Hi there. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Alexandra Bowman, and I'm a senior as well as a grad student. And my question is, how
Senior as well as grad student.
Wonderful.
is this weird ABM English program? Yeah, it's fun. But I'm just wondering how you kind of sought to understand your leadership style, and then how that kind of affects what you do in the day-to-day. And like, I did a student journalism leadership program thing this past summer where we flew out to Indiana for a couple days, and they gave us like a Myers Briggs test and told us like, you are a creative, you are a choleric, you know, and have you ever done that kind of an analysis, and how does that affect the way you lead?
I've done all of those 360 Myers Briggs, which quadrant you're in. But what it boiled down to for me was creating a leadership style that represented how I wanted to be led. And so I've had the benefit of being an employee for 20 years. So I know I've had many bosses, and as we all have and will through our career. And so I've been able to almost like cherry pick, like this person was really good at this. This person was really good at listening. I loved how this person gave feedback. I love how this person communicated. And I was very deliberate, you know, you talk about tactical, very deliberate in writing out like my own manifesto to myself that I still have of what type of leader do you want to be? What are the attributes that are important? And I have it saved in my phone because I remind myself of it every couple of months. Like, don't forget, before you stepped into this job, you said you wanted to lead this way, because that's the representation of what was important to me before I got into this job when I was, you know, being led. Now that I'm a leader, I don't want to lose that. And so I was very deliberate in finding over the course of my career, you know, cherry picking and putting together kind of a potpourri of all of the types of leaders that I've had that I felt good about their leadership, and I've tried to emulate that.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to do that. I've never done that. That's amazing.
Hi, Ms. Wallace. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name's Aryaman. I'm a sophomore in the School of Foreign Service. And my question was about when you discussed your passions and hard work and really working your butt off. And I feel like I kind of do those things, but sometimes getting that chance with an employer is a little bit hard. So I was wondering if you could speak more about how you really get them to believe in you, even if you believe in yourself.
And you're a sophomore?
Yeah.
So the work starts now. Started a minute ago. You know, I think some of it is persistence. It's having the clear vision and direction that you have of what you want to do. It's easier for whether it's a hiring manager or a mentor or someone to help guide you, because you know kind of what you want to do there. So the some level of respectful professional persistence, clarity, I think consistency. There, you know, I've got a couple of freshmen or students who I met when they were freshmen that have done an incredible job of keeping in touch with me as they go along their careers. One just graduated in December, one's graduating in May. I still talk to them on a regular basis. I still, you know, help them in any way that I can. I still give them guidance. The good thing is they're so talented, they don't need my help to get a job or an internship, but it's more about that, like helping them to craft their careers. But, you know, the onus is and was on them to keep that relationship going. The reason that I know Jonathan graduated in December and Sarah's graduating in May, and I met them when they were 18 years old, is because they've been consistent in following up. And so I think that's the biggest thing. And I would also say, like, don't be shy about showing why you're passionate about, you know, whatever the path is. Like, I feed off of a young journalist who's excited about getting to do this thing, or I'm excited about the craft, I'm excited about learning, and that translates into any field. And so I think also, like, if it feels like a perfunctory, hello, Miss Jones, da-da-da, like, I want to feel the heat in your communications, because I'll remember that.
And that was the advice I've given to him in the past and others, which is like, when I started on Capitol Hill, I just literally wrote out 5 members, wrote out a pitch, which was probably the beginning of my communications career, and knocked on their doors and expressed a level of enthusiasm, excitement, and desire to be value add.
The person on the receiving end wants to feel that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, that's the person you want to bring on, you want to hire, somebody who wants to create value. And then the other point I think that is a good lesson for young people is the point you made earlier, which is even if you find yourself at the Weather Channel, which is not where you thought you were going to be, there's opportunity to learn and to grow, to build a portfolio, to develop relationships, develop a reputation. So even if you find yourself not in quite the place where you thought you would be, when you take a look back at it all, like when you hit 40, like we are, and then you look back, you're like, oh, now it all makes sense. This had to happen because it prepared me for the next, which prepared me for that moment.
And I'll tell you, when I was at the Weather Channel, while I was there, I literally went out on maternity leave. This company called NBC came and bought the Weather Channel. So I came back, met all the NBC people, and then a few years later, those are the people that recruited me to come work for the network. I wouldn't be here if that
so
wasn't
were any of the people who were at the Weather Channel when you first started still there?
Oh yeah, we text all the time. We watch the same TV shows and we live text each other. Yeah.
Did you send them your announcement like, look how it turned out? I'm just joking. Okay, sorry. Over here.
Hi, my name is Nicolette. I am a sophomore in the college. So excited to be here. And my question was, in regards to the racial reckoning that you were talking about, like companies, organizations, and businesses really actually made a substantial, real effort to put Black people in their companies, increase representation, education, putting Black people in positions of power. So I'm wondering what you think the real impact of that would be in the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, no, it's funny because we had a conversation about this earlier where there was the moment, right? Like there was this period where every company was examining itself and where do we stand in the way of representation and diversity, and we're having this moment in the universe. And one of the things I'm really proud about is, I feel like whether it's on the air, behind the scenes, the decision-making roles, and just how we program, we don't program against like a month to cover these things, right? Like we've really come a long way in ensuring that the stories we tell 365 are representative of all communities. And so I think there was kind of that splash, that moment that happened. And I think, I'll speak for us and then I'll talk about just kind of in general. For us, it wasn't a moment of racial reckoning. It was a shift in how we do business, a shift in how and how we cover stories and who covers the stories and who's covered. For us, some of that was part of my boss, Cesar Conde's 50% challenge, where the focus is ensuring the workforce is 50% women and 50% people of color. That alone forces the conversation to be a different conversation around the table. That concept alone forces the decision makers to look a little different. And my hope for whether it lasts across businesses and industries is that people will take kind of that moment, that shock to the system, and it just changes how we all operate.
And I will just challenge this idea that corporations have diversified in response to. And the only reason I say that is because I'm someone who's trying to transition from public to the private sector. It's a great Washington Post article just recently, maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, about the 50 most profitable companies and how there's still a lack of diversity. Black in particular is what they focused on post George Floyd. To your point, everyone made these promises, yet how is it materialized?
Sure.
And they found that like of the 50, 45 of them have head of D&I are Black, and 2 Black CEOs, and sort of no pipeline after that.
But
right?
that's why you've got to create programs that are lasting, not just the flash in the pan in the moment.
Sure, and I think leadership matters. To your point about Caesar, I mean, he's fantastic. How he's set a new paradigm for the entire, for the entirety of NBC, I should say.
NBC News Group, like this is an initiative across 3 different businesses.
But I think I say that to say there's still a lot of work.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And we still have to apply a lot of pressure. We talked about this actually in my discussion group today, in fact. So it requires you guys to continue to stay very diligent about these issues and continue to remain engaged in pressuring these companies to reflect the country.
I think that's important to underscore. Like a lot of that comes from you guys. You are about to enter the workforce. Like it's imperative on you to hold businesses accountable, to hold industries accountable, to hold companies accountable, because that's the only way it'll be sustained.
And the cool thing about it is you can point to Rashida Jones and say, this is an example of what leadership looks like and what we can do. Or you can point to an Ashley Etienne, because I made that point before. In politics, it was always, and Mo could probably speak to this, always like, we can't find any diversity. Who are they? Where are they? And so for me, every time I showed up to the table, I'm like, I want to eliminate that point. I don't want you to have that. I'm showing up, but I'm also bringing everybody with me, right?
Yep.
And I'm going to be an example for everybody that you can point to and say, we can do those jobs.
Yep.
Last question, but thank you for your question.
Hi, my name is Margot. Again, just to echo, thank you so much for being here. This has been an incredible conversation. My question is, in a media landscape now where it feels like so much of our news is kind of gravitating around crisis and conflict, what keeps you optimistic working in this industry?
Oh, it's an interesting question. I think the public service. I look at the work that we do as truly a public service. If our job is to communicate to the public what's happening in the world in places, in corners that you can't necessarily access and bring these stories to life. And so I think it's the public service part of what we do that keeps me energized and optimistic as far as like what's on the camera, but I would also say behind the camera, the pipelines we're building the journalists that we're growing, broadening the scope of the type of stories we tell and the communities we tell those stories in. Like those are the stories that are memorable. Those are the stories that kind of that have the heart and stick with people, and that's what I'm optimistic about. Beyond just every news cycle has a season, and we've been covering COVID for 2 years. That won't be forever. There will be an election every 2 years, but it won't necessarily be the driver. But it's all of those things that are important in between that help color kind of who we are.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So one last question before you leave, and let me just say thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. I know you're busy. This has been an incredible conversation. I hope that you guys have found it to be value add in your lives, and that you've learned something that you can take from here and apply as you think about your own power and how to exercise it. What do you hope is your legacy leaving MSNBC, or your greatest accomplishment? And it may be too early, but you clearly are someone who thinks through these things, writes out manifestos, gives yourself a direction. So what would you say you hope would be your greatest accomplishment?
Paying it forward. It's building teams of leaders that didn't look the way they did before. Mm-hmm. Finding new voices, new leaders, new perspectives. Diversity is it's in some ways kind of an overused word, and so I don't want to use the word diversity, but bringing new, exciting voices to the table, in front of the camera, behind the camera, and creating kind of a different expectation of who we are as leaders.
Well, you're doing it.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, Rashida Jones.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, madam.